Nobody in that terminal gave him a second look. That was the thing about Raymond Kowalski. At 71 years old, with a face like cracked leather and hands that shook slightly when he reached for his coffee, he looked exactly like what he appeared to be. A retired grain farmer from western Kansas, flying home after visiting his daughter in Phoenix. He wore a Carhartt jacket the color of old mud. His boots had actual mud on them. He carried a canvas duffel bag that had been washed so many times the logo was completely gone. Nobody looked twice. That was until the dogs did. Terminal B at Denver International was busy that Thursday morning the way Denver always got busy in late October. Families heading home after fall break, business travelers in slim-cut suits staring at their phones, a few college kids sprawled across the uncomfortable chairs near Gate 47. The usual noise of a mid-sized airport on a weekday. Announcements nobody listened to, the rolling thunder of luggage wheels, a child somewhere crying about something that seemed catastrophic to a 4-year-old. Sergeant First Class Dominic Fleischer, 26 years old, 8 months into his first assignment with the TSA's Joint Military K9 unit, was running his team through a routine sweep of the terminal. 6 Belgian Malinois and 1 German Shepherd. 7 dogs total, all working, all focused, all trained by some of the best handlers the U.S. military had ever produced. Fleischer was proud of his unit. He had reason to be. These animals had done 2 overseas rotations between them. They didn't rattle. They didn't break focus. They worked like machines. Beautiful, terrible machines. The protocol was standard. Fan out across the terminal. Check luggage drop zones, trash cans, unattended bags. Stay fluid. Stay quiet. The dogs moved like water around the travelers, weaving between legs and bags without disturbing anyone. Fleischer was watching Ranger, his German Shepherd, the one he'd personally worked with for 3 years, when he noticed something wrong. Ranger had stopped, not slowed down, not paused to sniff something. Stopped completely in the middle of the main concourse, his head up, ears forward, every line of his body locked onto something about 40 feet ahead. Then Titan stopped, then Duchess, then all 5 Malinois, one after another, like a wave breaking in reverse, each dog going rigid the moment its attention caught whatever Ranger had already found. Fleischer's hand went to his radio. 7 military dogs, simultaneously frozen, all oriented on the same point. On an old man sitting alone near the window, drinking bad airport coffee and reading a folded newspaper. What's with them, Morrow? Corporal Tanya Morrow, 23, 2 years on the unit, was the closest handler to the anomaly. She was good. Fleischer had written that in her last review, meant it sincerely. She had good instincts. Right now her instincts were clearly telling her the same thing his were. This made no sense. I don't know, Sergeant. Duchess hasn't done this since. She stopped. I've never actually seen her do this. The old man hadn't moved. He was still reading his paper. The Kansas City Chiefs. He was reading the sports section, and the Chiefs had apparently done something worth reading about, because he hadn't looked up. He seemed completely unaware that 7 highly trained military animals were staring at him with the kind of focused intensity usually reserved for explosive ordnance. Fleischer walked forward. Procedure. Approach, assess, de-escalate if needed. Travelers nearby were starting to notice a few people had stopped, phones coming out, the low murmur of attention beginning to build. Sir. Fleischer kept his voice neutral. Professional. Sir, could I ask you to stay seated for a moment? The old man looked up from his paper. His eyes were pale gray, almost colorless in the terminal light, and there was something in them that Fleischer couldn't quite name. Not alarm, not confusion. Something slower than that. Something that had seen Fleischer's type 1,000 times and was not particularly impressed. Sure, the old man said. His voice was flat, unhurried, slightly rough, like gravel at the bottom of a dry creek bed. These animals are trained military working dogs, Fleischer said, already shifting into the explanation he gave civilians when they got nervous around the unit. They've detected something they haven't detected anything. The old man set his newspaper down neatly on the seat beside him. They recognized something. There's a difference. Fleischer stopped talking. Behind him, he heard Morrow make a small sound, not quite a word. The 7 dogs were still frozen. All of them. Not a single one had broken stance, and they all 7, were watching the old man with their full attention. Not threatening attention. That was the thing that was starting to crawl under Fleischer's skin. These animals were trained to go rigid like this for threats. What they were showing right now wasn't threat response. He'd seen threat response 100 times. This was something else. If he had to name it, and he really didn't want to name it, he would have called it recognition. Sir, I'm going to need to ask you for some identification. Of course you do. The old man reached slowly, deliberately slowly, the way people who understood firearms and tension and the danger of sudden movements always reached into the inside breadth pocket of his jacket and produced a plain brown wallet. He opened it and held out a Kansas driver's license with 2 fingers. Raymond Kowalski. Diab, March 4, 1953. Larned, Kansas. Fleischer looked at it. He handed it back. He was running out of procedure. Mr. Kowalski, can you explain why our dogs are reacting to you? The old man looked at the dogs for a long moment. Something passed across his face, the ghost of something, there and gone before Fleischer catch it. Which one's new? He asked. Fleischer blinked. I'm sorry? To the unit. Kowalski nodded toward the line of dogs. One of them's new, joined recently. The others have been together a while, I'd guess, 2 years minimum. But one of them is still reading the group, not just me. Which one? Morrow spoke before Fleischer could stop her. Titan. He came to us 6 months ago. The old man nodded slowly, as if confirming something he'd already suspected. He'll be fine. Give him another year, Mr. Kowalski. Fleischer's voice had gone harder than he intended. He was aware of the crowd now. Maybe 30-40 people had stopped. The phones were all out. The low murmur had become something more. He felt the weight of being watched, and it made him want to assert control over a situation he no longer entirely understood. I'm going to need you to come with us to Sergeant. The voice came from behind him, quiet, but something in it made Fleischer turn around fast. The way you turned around fast when you heard a certain kind of authority. The kind that didn't need to raise itself. Colonel Janet Yee, U.S. Army, retired, was standing at the edge of the gathering crowd in civilian clothes and carrying a coffee that she'd clearly been intending to drink somewhere quiet. She was 64 years old, and even in a fleece pullover and hiking boots, she looked like what she was. She held up her retired officer's ID without being asked. Stand down, Sergeant, she said, not unkindly, and for the love of everything holy, please do not put Raymond Kowalski in an interrogation room. Fleischer looked at her ID, looked at her face, looked back at the old man in the Carhartt jacket. You know him, Colonel? I know of him, she said. Most people who worked in certain places during certain decades know of him. She glanced at Kowalski, and something in her face changed. Not deference, exactly. More like the way a person's face changed when they were standing near something that mattered. Whether he'd remember me is another question. The old man had risen from his seat by now, joints moving with the careful deliberation of a man who'd asked a great deal from his body over many decades and was still paying the interest. He looked at Yee. He studied her face. Fort Bragg, he said finally. 984. You were a captain then. Dog handler's training evaluation, 3rd week of October. Yee stared at him. That was 31 years ago. You had a problem with Shepard on the left recall command, he said. We fixed it in 2 sessions. The color changed in Yee's face. Not embarrassment. Something closer to wonder. Fleischer was not a stupid man. He knew when he was out of his depth. He'd known it for about 4 minutes now and had been managing that knowledge with the particular kind of controlled frustration that young men who were good at their jobs felt when they encountered something they hadn't yet been taught to understand. He called his supervisor. His supervisor called someone else. While that chain of calls was happening, the crowd in Terminal B stayed remarkably still for an airport crowd. People had lowered their phones, not because they'd stopped recording, but because something about what was unfolding had made them feel slightly ashamed of recording it. There was a quality to the air around Raymond Kowalski that made spectacle feel like the wrong response. The dogs hadn't moved, all 7 of them still oriented on the old man, still in that locked and attentive posture that wasn't threat and wasn't play, and wasn't anything in the standard training manual. Morrow finally asked what everyone else was thinking. Mr. Kowalski. She hesitated. She was young and she was trying. Why are they doing this? The old man looked at her with those pale, flat eyes, not unkind, just honest in a way that didn't bother softening itself. Because they were trained by someone I trained, he said, and that person trained them the way I taught, with a foundation command in Czechoslovakian military working dog protocol. Specific vocal frequency, specific cadence. It doesn't matter how many years pass. It doesn't matter who holds the leash. When they hear it, they respond. It's not loyalty to me. It's the bedrock they were built on. Morrow looked at the dogs. She looked at Kowalski. Could you? She stopped, started again. Would you show us? Fleischer opened his mouth to object. He wasn't sure what the objection was, exactly. He closed it. The old man looked at the dogs. All 7 were already watching him. Duchess, who in 3 years of service had never, not once, Morrow would later swear to this, broken a working posture for anything other than a direct command from her handler, had her ears forward and her eyes soft in a way that made Morrow's throat tighten for reasons she couldn't explain. Kowalski said one word. It wasn't English. It was short, barely 2 syllables, spoken at a precise pitch and cadence, the way you'd play a specific note on an instrument that was tuned to hear it and only it. Every dog lay down simultaneously, not with the reluctant, controlled compliance of a dog following a command from a handler it respected, with the immediate, total ease of a dog hearing something it had always, underneath everything, been waiting to hear again. The terminal was quiet. Somewhere near gate 44, a woman started clapping. 1 person, then 2, then enough that it became something that filled the concourse and made several of the business travelers look up from their phones for the first time in hours. Fleischer stood in the middle of his unit. 7 dogs down, all of them calm, the calmest they'd been all morning, and felt something shift in his understanding of the world. Not break, not shatter, just shift the way a lens shifts when it finally finds the right focus. "Who are you?" he asked. It came out quieter than he intended, less like a demand and more like a genuine question. Raymond Kowalski had not intended to tell anyone anything. He never did, these days. There had been a time, a long time, the longest time of his life, when telling anyone anything had been a professional liability and sometimes a mortal one. That habit didn't disappear when the work did. But he was 71, and his knees hurt, and the coffee in Denver airports was genuinely terrible, and there was something about Fleischer's face, young, capable, slightly humbled, trying to understand, that reminded him of faces he'd seen a long time ago in places he was not supposed to remember. So he sat back down, and he talked. Not about everything, never everything, but enough. He told Fleischer about Fort Benning in 1974, when he'd been 21 and the Army had looked at his aptitude scores and his language evaluations and his psych profile and decided he was useful for something that didn't have a formal name yet. He told him about the year he'd spent in West Germany, learning from Czech defectors who'd brought with them the most advanced military working dog training methodology in the world at the time, methodology that the Warsaw Pact had developed over 20 years, and that Western forces were only beginning to understand. He told him about the protocol, the layered command structure, the vocal frequency training, the way you could imprint a dog at the foundational level so that no matter who handled it later, no matter how many years passed, the bedrock was there. The first voice, the first note, the thing the dog was built on. He did not tell Fleischer the name of the program. He didn't tell him the names of the people he'd worked with. He didn't tell him what had happened to most of them. He told him about 30 years of training trainers, not dogs, not directly, not after the first decade. Trainers, the people who handled the animals that went into places where information could not be written down and trust could not be formalized, and the only reliable communication happened between a human being and an animal that had been taught at the deepest possible level what that human being's voice meant. Those animals, he said, nodding toward the 7 dogs who were still lying down, still watching him, were trained by someone who went through a program I helped build. I don't know who your trainer was, but whoever held those dogs first spoke to them the way I taught people to speak, and the dogs remember that. They always remember that. He stopped, looked at his coffee, which had gone cold. The old ways don't disappear, he said, almost to himself. They get inherited. Every dog in this terminal carries something put into the world 30 years ago. That's... He stopped again. Something moved in his face. That's not nothing. Fleischer's supervisor arrived 12 minutes later. She took one look at the situation. 7 dogs still calmly prone, a retired colonel she apparently recognized, a 71-year-old man in a Carhartt jacket, and made the particular expression of someone who had been in government service long enough to recognize, on sight, the human silhouette of classified history. She didn't ask for clarification. She thanked Mr. Kowalski for his patience. She got her people reorganized and moving again with quiet efficiency. As the crowd dispersed and the terminal reassembled itself into ordinary noise, Morrow found herself standing near Kowalski while he gathered his newspaper and his canvas duffel. She'd been turning something over in her mind since he'd spoken that word and the dogs went down, and she figured she had maybe 45 seconds before the moment passed. "Can I ask you something?" He glanced at her. "Duchess," she said. "She's been with me 3 years. She's never, not for anything, she's never responded to anyone else like that. Not even the people who trained her before I got her." She paused. "Is that normal? For the protocol?" The old man considered the question seriously, which she appreciated. He wasn't the kind of person who gave quick answers because quick answers were easier. "It means she was trained well," he said finally. "And it means you've kept her well. An animal that's been handled badly loses the foundation. It gets buried under fear or confusion. Duchess still has it clean." He looked at the shepherd who was watching the old man with her soft, calm eyes. "That's a credit to you, Corporal, more than you probably know." Morrow didn't say anything. She wasn't sure she could, right at that moment. Kowalski picked up his duffel. He had a flight to catch. He had almost reached the gate, Gate 31, southwest, direct to Wichita, when Fleischer caught up with him. The sergeant was slightly out of breath, not from the pace but from something else, some effort that wasn't physical. "Mr. Kowalski." The old man stopped, turned. Fleischer stood there in his uniform, in the middle of the busy concourse, looking younger than he had when this started, which was strange because that wasn't how authority was supposed to work. "I owe you an apology," Fleischer said. "I handled that badly at the start. I was," he chose the word carefully, "arrogant. I assumed I understood what I was seeing." The old man studied him for a moment. "You were doing your job," Kowalski said. "That's not the same as arrogance. I talked over your explanation before you'd finished giving it." "Yes, and I was about to take you to an interrogation based on my assumption that I was the authority in the situation." "Yes, that was arrogance, a beat." "Yes," Kowalski said, "it was." He said it without cruelty, without satisfaction, just, honestly, the way a person stated a fact that had already passed and could now therefore be useful. Fleischer nodded once. He was processing something. Kowalski could see it happening, the particular kind of processing that happened to capable young people when they had their first real encounter with the difference between knowledge and experience. "Is there?" Fleischer started, then stopped. Started again. "Is there somewhere, a record, documentation, somewhere I could learn more about the protocol? The methodology?" The old man looked at him for a long moment. "The people who built it with me are mostly gone," he said. "Some of it was documented. Some of it's classified and probably will stay classified. Some of it," a pause, "some of it lives in the dogs." He glanced back toward the main concourse, where 7 military working dogs were now back on their feet, back in formation, moving through the terminal on their next sweep, doing their jobs, carrying, in every trained response, in every learned command, in every instinct that had been carefully and deliberately shaped over years, carrying something forward that Raymond Kowalski had put into the world when he was younger than Fleischer was now. "Find the trainer who trained your trainer," the old man said. "Ask them where they learned. Follow it back." He looked at Fleischer. "The old ways don't disappear, Sergeant. They just wait for someone to bother looking." He turned and walked toward Gate 31. Fleischer stood in the middle of the concourse and watched him go. An old man in a mud-colored jacket, a worn canvas bag on his shoulder, moving through the ordinary crowd of an ordinary Thursday morning at Denver International. And thought that if he hadn't been there, if he hadn't seen it himself, he would never have believed that a person could look like that and be what Raymond Kowalski was. Which was, he understood now, entirely the point. The flight to Wichita was 40 minutes. Kowalski slept through most of it, the way he slept through most things these days, easily, deeply, without dreams. His daughter would pick him up at the airport. She'd made pot roast, she'd said. She thought he looked thin. He'd never told her what he did. He'd told his wife 30 years ago, and she'd kept it with the particular quiet strength that she'd kept everything. That was just who she was, and when she died, 8 years ago now, that knowledge had gone with her, and that was all right. That was as it should be. He'd built things that still moved in the world. He could feel them sometimes, not literally, not with any mystical sense of connection, just with the particular knowledge of a person who understood how deeply training goes, how far it carries, how a voice, a word, a cadence, a frequency can be passed from one careful hand to another and still arrive intact years and decades later, still recognizable at the foundation level, still capable of reaching past everything that time had added and landing in that deep original place where the first lessons lived. 7 dogs in Denver lying down together, calm and clean and perfect. He hadn't put them there. He'd put something into the person who'd trained the person who'd trained them. Or maybe it was one more step removed than that. He didn't know. It didn't matter. The old ways don't disappear. They get inherited. The plane began its descent into Wichita. Below, the Kansas plains spread flat and brown and enormous in every direction, the way they always had, the way they would long after everyone on this plain was gone. Raymond Kowalski looked out the window at the land he'd grown up on, and then left, and then spent the rest of his life quietly returning to. He thought about Fleischer. The kid would be fine. He had the thing, that particular combination of capability and humility that made the difference, ultimately, between a person who was good at their job and a person who understood what their job was for. The arrogance would sand off. It always did, in the ones who had the foundation. He thought about Duchess, with her calm eyes and her clean foundation. He thought about the word he'd spoken in that terminal. 2 syllables, a specific pitch, something he hadn't said out loud in years, and how the dogs had gone down so fast, so completely, so without hesitation. They knew, even after all this time, in all these different hands, in all these different years, with all the training layered on top, they still knew. He pulled his jacket tighter and closed his eyes again as the wheels came down. Home.